Have you ever written some Java and then just stopped and wondered, how does this actually become a real clickable application that people can use on the web? Well, today we're not just looking at lines of code, we're going to pull back the curtain and look at the actual blueprint. We're going to follow a single mouse click from your screen all the way into the heart of a server and all the way back again. Let's dive in.
So, you've put in the work, right? You get the syntax, you understand classes and methods, but there's always that big question mark hanging there, isn't there? How does all this theory, all this stuff I learned, turn into something real, something someone can actually use? Well, that's the gap we're going to close today.
First up, we're building that bridge. We're taking those concepts you already know and showing you the structure you need to build a whole project from the ground up.
You've got the essentials down pat, and you should be proud of that. These fundamentals are like your building materials. They're the individual bricks, the lumber, the nails of our application. They're strong, they're reliable, and they're absolutely essential. But let's be honest, on their own, they're just a pile of materials.
Because just having a pile of bricks doesn't build you a house, right? You need a blueprint. And in the world of software, this architecture, this blueprint, is our map. It tells us how all the different parts of our code are supposed to talk to each other, and maybe most importantly, it keeps a really complex project from turning into a chaotic, tangled mess.
So, what tools do we actually use to follow this blueprint? Let's take a look at the core technologies that really bring a modern Java web app to life. You know, a modern web app is usually broken down into three big layers. Up at the top, you've got the front end. That's everything the user actually sees and touches. It's built with things like HTML or JSP, which, by the way, stands for Java Server Pages. Then you have the back end, the real engine of the whole operation, often powered by a framework like Spring Boot. And at the foundation, you've got a database, which basically acts as the application's long-term memory.
To really understand how these layers all dance together, let's trace one single action from the perspective we all know best: the users.
It all starts with something we do a dozen times a day without even thinking about it: a login page. The user types in their info, and then they do one simple thing. They click Login. And that single click, that's the little spark that sets this entire massive machine into motion.
And here it is, the magic question. That click just happened in a web browser, maybe thousands of miles away from where the server actually is. So how in the world does it travel through the internet, get understood by our Java code, and securely check information that's buried deep inside a database?
All right, let's pop the hood. We are now heading into the engine room to follow that click's journey, step by step, right through the heart of the backend. The very first stop for that user's clicks, which has now been turned into a little package of data, is a component we call the controller. You can think of it as the front door for our entire backend system.
The best way to think of the controller is like the maitre d' at a really fancy restaurant. It's not going to cook your food, right? But it greets you at the door, it understands what you want, in this case, I want to log in, and it knows exactly which table to take you to. Or in our case, which service is the right one to handle the job.
So once the controller knows what the user wants to do, it doesn't do the work itself. Its job is only to direct traffic. It's a traffic cop. So it hands off the request with that username and password to the next layer in our architecture.
And that brings us to the heart of our application, the service layer. This is the brain. This is the chef in the kitchen. It's right here that the actual business logic lives. Things like, does this username even exist? Is this password correct? All the important thinking happens right here.
But of course, the service layer can't check a password it doesn't have. To do its job, it needs to look up the user's information. So it makes a request to our final internal layer.
And welcome to the data layer. You'll also hear this called the repository. Think of this as the application's pantry or its library. Its only job, its entire reason for existing, is to communicate with the database. It knows how to get data, save new data, and update old data. It goes, fetches the user's info, and hands it back to the service layer.
Now, it's worth taking a quick detour here. In our little example, all these layers might live together in one big application. We call that a monolith. But in a lot of modern systems, the app is actually broken down into smaller, independent microservices. The best analogy is one big restaurant kitchen versus a food court with lots of separate, specialized stalls. They all work together, but you can update or manage them independently.
So how do all these different parts or microservices talk to each other? Well, they use something called an API, which just stands for Application Programming Interface. It's really just a set of rules for communication. And when one service asks another for data, the response usually comes back in this simple text format called JSON, which you see right here.
It's just a clean, human-readable way to structure and send data back and forth.
And these API conversations follow a pretty standard set of verbs. A GET request is like asking to read a user's profile. A PUT or a POST request is used to create or update information, like if you're changing your password. And delete, well, I think you can guess what that one does.
Okay, wow. We have traveled from the user screen all the way down to the database and back. So let's recap and look at the full blueprint one more time.
Just look at that. It's a beautiful, logical flow. From the front end, the request gets greeted by the controller, it's processed by the service, which uses the data layer to talk to the database, and then the answer, success or failure, travels all the way back up that chain to the user's screen. Every single step has a crystal clear responsibility.
And this isn't just one way of doing things. This layered architecture, controller, service, data, is the fundamental pattern for building applications that are strong, easy to update, and can grow to handle millions of users. By giving each layer just one specific job, developers can manage incredible complexity. What you've just seen is the blueprint of the modern web. So now you have the map. You have the blueprint that connects your knowledge of Java to the structure of a real-world application. That gap between theory and a real project, it's been bridged. So the only question left is, what are you going to build?